So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming tonight to the Art Talk with Christopher. Before we get started, here at the Rotary Center for the Arts, or in my basement in Kelowna, we are situated on the unceded and traditional territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. Very grateful to live, play, and work here. For those of you who do not know Christopher is a writer, director, actor, dramaturge, teacher, etc. He's a graduate of the Playhouse Acting School and has played on stages in Europe and Canada. He's a founding member and past artistic associate of Bard on the Beach. Christopher's written several plays, including the adaptation of Gulliver's Travels for Kaleidoscope Theatre, and also Falsework, which he recently directed at the Canadian College of Performing Arts, which is an adaptation of a book of poetry by Gary Geddes. He's received 2 NCRC awards, including Best Current Affairs Program in 2017 for the Charles Campbell Story. He's also received the Edmund Kean Award from Bard on the Beach for Lifetime Achievement, and is the founder and owner of Shakescenes, in which he teaches acting workshops across the country. I know many of us in this room have attended and benefited greatly from those. And Christopher has also taught at the Canadian College of Performing Arts since 2000. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Christopher, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Alana, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I want to talk about my relationship with the process of adaptation, which is one of the things I do as a theater professional. And I'll start by addressing just who I am and my history as a storyteller, as a theater artist. I've been working in the theater since the late 80s, since 1989. I've been working for 35 years in the theater as an actor, director, and acting coach, and a playwright, a sound designer, and a dramaturg. And I always urge my students, I teach in Victoria, to learn how to wear a few hats comfortably in this field. If you have any interest in sound design, do it, learn it. It's another thing that you can do in this highly competitive community that is the Canadian theater. So it's really important to indulge all of your interests because it makes you much more employable, as I'm sure all of you know. 35 years as a theater artist. I trained at the Vancouver Playhouse Acting School, and there I had the good fortune to meet Leofwin Luke, a fiery Welshman who was our dramaturg and taught us play building. So I had written plays before that, but I had never really looked at dramatic structure or play building with a great deal of detail or care, and that was Leofwin's great skill. He taught us to look at 4 elements of drama, which he described as time. How is the storyteller dealing with time? How is what is the space? How does the space interact and impinge, change the behaviors of the characters that are there in the theatrical space, that the wear of the piece? What's happening on the surface of the event? There could be an argument that's related to a murder that has occurred before the play began, the patricide, or the uncle's murder of a father, as we have in Hamlet. So that event is hugely important to the overall story. So time, space, surface, event. I've been looking at storytelling, keeping those 4 elements in mind as long as I, worked with Leofund, and he was a huge influence on my work, both as a director and as a writer. I also had the good fortune to work with Margaret Hollingsworth, who, the playwright, wrote Ever Loving and War Babies, the house that Jack built. She was a great helpmate and champion of my early work, and I learned a great deal from her. And we also at the Playhouse studied with Frank Moore, who wrote The Third Ascent and Big Baby, and I think now lives on the island, continues to write. Another really wonderful writer who taught me a lot about dialogue and the creative process, and how the playwright approaches rehearsal and learns from the rehearsal process and the workshop process. One of the questions that was asked that Alana put to me as I was putting together this talk was, how do the roles you play influence your work, including how you approach your work? And I think I consider myself first and foremost an actor, a storyteller. And that storytelling fixation, that storytelling passion has influenced all aspects of my work in the theater, as a sound designer, as a director, as a dramaturg. That we are storytellers at heart. We are attempting to kind of enliven fables, and tell stories that hopefully are transformative, that change people, and that's been my goal as long as I've been working in the theater. I believe in the transformative power of theater. What have been some challenges to my work as an adapter, as a theater artist? What have been some challenges to me and my process through this debacle, this plague, this COVID time that we've all been dealing with? I feel for all of you. Every time I meet another actor in a coaching situation or online talking about their projects, there's tremendous a sense of a great longing to get back to that communal event, to get back into the room with other actors, to rehearse again, to tell stories to groups of strangers. That longing is incredibly keen, and will be with us as long as this pause lasts. I have, like a lot of you, more spare time than I've ever had in my career, and that spare time has led me to look at, kind of rethink what do I want to be doing in the next few years. What's been left undone that I would like to do in the theater. And so, excuse me, new projects have come to the fore that I wouldn't have otherwise considered if I didn't have this abundance of extra time. Now, how to use it? I'm trying to get into a more consistent routine with my writing and with my theatrical plans for the future when things open up, and that has worked reasonably well. So the time has been incredibly challenging, but I've been looking for other outlets, looking for other options. I just came from teaching in Victoria, and we at CCPA, where I've taught for the last 22 years, are unique in the country in that there are only we're one of 20%, part of the 20% training colleges that are actually doing it in situ with actors in the same room, masked and socially distanced, but in the same room. So we have rehearsed new plays. We've shared plays in performance with the college cohort, small audiences of 20 to 25 of college cohorts. And those productions have been streamed to audiences that might not otherwise have been exposed to the work of the college. So that's been a shift. We have people tuning in from Australia, from Europe, that would not have otherwise witnessed a CCPA show. So that's a change. It's not theater in the traditional sense. There are profound limitations to a socially distanced play presentation. The characters in this piece that I directed were all masked. So there are limitations there, demands on the actor that wouldn't otherwise be as pronounced. What do I do? How do I tell the story with my extremities? How do I act more fully, use my full corporal presence and use it in the work? How do I get by without the use of my, the lower part of my face? My mouths are so expressive. So it comes down to how the silhouette and the body, the whole person tells the story, which is a great challenge, but a wonderful challenge for young actors. Anxiety through this phase, through the COVID time, has been dialed up. It's more of a challenge and intimacy, which we've been looking at very, very closely over the last 3 or 4 years. That kind of sudden intimacy that is needed in the rehearsal hall, that has been very difficult to find. Not impossible, but it's terribly frustrating for young performers to have to deal with the limitations of a touchless environment, a place where they can only get 6 feet from the other performers. So intimacy takes different forms. We started to talk in our rehearsal of Falsework about COVID stylization, about spatially distanced communication. And that was, I think it was useful to think of communication in those terms for the actors, because it forced them to send their impulses, send their tactics across through a larger area. The tactics, the impulses had to travel further in the space. So I think that was, although it's a limitation the students are dealing with, I think it helped them tremendously in their training. So the training was not lost. What we gained in other areas in terms of the corporal nature of performance. So though it's been a very, very challenging time, it's been incredibly rewarding. And in many ways, I feel that this period, COVID, has robbed with one hand and given with the other, that opportunities have presented themselves, have come up in my professional life that would not have otherwise presented themselves. And while other opportunities have gone away, I've lost directing jobs, I've lost acting jobs, but while that has happened, that's 7 months ago, Gary Geddes, he's a poet, lives on Thetis Island right now, contacted me out of the blue to say, I hear you do dramaturgy work. I have a play that I'd like you to help me with. So it was a play about the last days of the communist leader Trotsky. Takes place in Mexico City. So I worked with him on that piece, and that's when he reminded me of the piece Falsework, which was on my bookshelf. And something I'd read 4 years before and thought this would make an interesting theatrical piece. So out of that relationship, which came out of the blue, came this new possibility, turning Falsework, the poem suite, into a theatrical event. And so that opportunity, I doubt it would have come to me if Gary had been, not casting about for new opportunities in the, in this strange time that is the COVID pause. So that was that was wonderful. Again, these opportunities appeared while other opportunities were slipping away. So I've learned through this challenging time that I think through COVID, my communication skills have been tested, and I think they've improved, because with masks, with social distancing, we as theater communicators have to be so much more to the point, so much clearer, because all we have is we have the voice to communicate. So inflection, intonation becomes enormously important, both for the director and for the performer receiving those corrections or notes. So it's been, I think, one of the benefits of this COVID experience has been an increase in communication skills. Like my communication skills have improved. We are also, as I said before, asked to act with the whole body, masked and distanced. We ask ourselves, well, how does this character walk? How does this character use her arms, her fingers? What story does her posture tell? So those choices and that exploration becomes enormously important. So I've also been through this COVID time absolutely flabbergasted, infused, inspired by the intrepid spirit of actors, just their adaptability and their optimism has moved me. So that is one thing that I will take away from this time, when the theaters open again. Hopes for the future. The one certainty is that venues will continue, theater companies will continue to try to rehearse shows. And those rehearsals will hopefully provide some much needed employment and creative possibilities for expression for actors and creative workers and designers in the theater. We will need more support from the private sector. Social distancing, we're told, will stay in place until at least the end of the summer, if not into the fall, if not longer. So what this shift is going to have a decisive effect on whether shows are financially viable or not. When you think that we have to reduce our viewing audience by 70% to make it feasible, this is a huge shift. I'm just going to put up on the screen right now a picture of the Berlin Ensemble, and that's as it exists this week in preparation for distanced viewing. This is the number of chairs that they are allowed to keep open for patrons. So, and this is a 700-seat theater that will now seat 200 patrons. So it's going to be enormously difficult for the smaller and regional theater companies to, launch a potentially viable, financially viable season with these kinds of numbers, with seats, with spectators reduced considerably. So this is a concern. Are we going to be looking for? Is this going to affect the kind of programming that happens? Will we return to safer productions, more co-productions, more how fragile will our coming back be? Will we be more risk averse as spectators, as actors, as artistic directors? This is a really important question. We know that many 50-seat theaters above bars, tiny theaters, that's where a lot of the A-house directors and players come from. They start in small theaters and branch out into larger ventures in theater, film, and TV. So this is going to have a huge effect. The paucity of small theater options for actors and directors and writers and designers is going to be problematic. So we have to maintain, we have to be diligent, we have to be intrepid, we have to be creative, and look for new ways to produce, new ways to move back into, new ways of pulling people into this dark room of strangers. There's a danger we go dark for longer than any of us are comfortable doing. So in the work of adaptation, I started out, I've done most of the writing that I've done has been work in this area. I've adapted a fantasy fiction piece of Ursula K. Le Guin's called Tehanu for Kaleidoscope years ago, and that toured all over Canada. And I also adapted for the same company Gulliver's Travels, which is an entirely different kind of venture, satire, a period piece, and I was working there with a company of really gifted commedia players and puppets. So incorporating puppets into the storytelling process became a really important aspect of the storytelling process. I've also adapted a number of Shakespearean plays for Bard on the Beach. I adapted Henry VI parts 1, 2, and 3 and turned it into a one full-length play, The War of the Roses, which was presented about a decade ago. And so Shakespeare taught me a lot about concision, about dramatic structure, about dramatic variety. And, I learned a great deal from, adaptations of Shakespearean pieces. And most recently, I adapted Gary Geddes' poem suite, Falsework. So this was unique in that the suite itself, there are historical characters, survivors in the piece, but there are all of the characters that perish, the fallen in the suite, are all unidentified. So it's this elegiac portrait of this time, the collapse of the Second Narrows Bridge in 1958, the biggest industrial accident in Vancouver's history, in fact, in Canada's history to the time. 18 workers died. And this piece chronicled the disparate voices as they led up to the creation of this monumental structure, as they endured its collapse, and as they mourned, as the survivors mourned. So it's as much a piece about the community the Vancouver community in the 50s as it is about an industrial accident. So it presented, wonderful challenges, and just moving it from the world of poetry to the world of the theater was a really challenging and fascinating endeavor. So what I've asked Ilana to do here is I have two different texts. The first text, called Disbelief, is the poem from the suite, Gary Geddes' suite. So I'm going to ask Ilana to read that poem, and then we're both going to read the scene that the poem was, that arose from this poem, that is part of the adaptation Falsework. So Ilana, do you want to read us Disbelief from
Sure.
Gary's book?
Sure. Bear with me, everyone. This is, oh, sure, Elise. It's a near cold read, so.
That's great. Thank you so much for jumping in.
To call me a mess would be a gross understatement. Life goes on, they said, as if I hadn't noticed. Go see Marcel Marceau, the French mime. It'll be good for you, my kids urged. A distraction, anything to make you laugh. The Georgia auditorium was packed. At least 1,800 throbbing egos wanting to be stroked, lifted out of themselves. I laughed sure enough, hysterically. The shushing around us sounded like a fleet of steam irons. I visualized barbells crushing him to the stage, the sword he swallowed, the one with the hilt engraved in gold, and the park full of old fogies, a dog walker bending to scoop but brushing it instead. Into the bushes. I cheered him on to come first in the bicycle race, his big French heart about to burst at the finish line. When he grew from fetus to childhood, old age, and death, I wept openly. Nothing was lost on me, not a single gesture or facial expression. The twitch of an eyebrow, the curl of a painted lip sent me reeling. What's real? What's imagined? Boundaries had disappeared. I couldn't bear to watch his high-wire tightrope act, so I waited in the lobby. The kids, embarrassed, said nothing. Me? Guilt, of course, at feeling better. Briefly. For weeks, the faces were interchangeable in dreams. Cosmetics, the pale makeup, a death mask. I'd been close enough to see sweat fall from his nose on stage. Now he was making love to me. Marcel, I cried. Harold, semen drying on my belly, the sad white face of full moon above me, solicitous, expressive in its silence, the resounding silence of the grave.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Now, I will read with you, because this is a kind of a suite for voices through here. We have the characters Marina and Manon, and then Manon takes over as she heads to, goes about her evening, going to a Marcel Marceau concert. So if we could start, Ilana, from Freckles' Halo Summer, at the top of the page.
Sorry, that's Maria?
Marina and Manon in
Okay.
the script version that I sent you earlier.
Okay. Freckles,
Halo Summer. Freckles, Halo Summer.
Freckles, Halo Summer.
Manon speaks.
Me?
Yes, please.
To call me a wreck would be a gross understatement. Go see Marcel Marceau, the French mime.
It'll be good for you.
A distraction.
Anything to make you laugh. It's the sounds of audience, orchestra tuning. Manon takes her seat. Drumroll. Marceau appears as weightlifter. In the Georgia auditorium, it erupts as the barbells overwhelm Bip, crushing him to the stage. Manon laughs, then the laughter builds maniacally, exaggerated sounds of shushing.
I laughed sure enough, Hysterically, the shushing around me sounded like a fleet of steam irons.
There's applause, darkness. Marceau appears with banner, youth, maturity, old age, and death. We hear Marceau's voice on the PA. Here is a silent story of man, with such eternal and fleeting moments that he would like to say without words, time stands still. We see Bip's 4 ages of man as Manon speaks.
When he grew from fetus to childhood, old age and death, I wept openly. Nothing was lost on me, not a single gesture or facial expression. The twitch of an eyebrow, the curl of a painted lip sent me reeling. What's real? What's imagined? Boundaries had disappeared.
As Bip's silent story ends, the audience claps. He reappears as a tightrope walker. After a few moments, Manon, overwhelmed, runs to the lobby. Marceau fades.
I couldn't bear to watch his high wire act. For weeks, the faces were interchangeable in dreams.
Behind Manon, we see Pops, her husband, in white face. He's dead. Bip appears opposite. Bip and Pops make love to her. Manon.
Cosmetics, the pale makeup of a death mask. I'd been close enough to see the sweat fall from his nose on stage. Now he was making love to me.
Oh, Manon. Cherie. The lovemaking ends.
Marcel, I cried. Harold, semen drying on my belly, the sad white face of a full moon above me, solicitous, expressive in its silence.
Marceau fades, leaving Pop's white face looming above Manon.
The resounding silence of the grave.
Fade into dawnlight. Young Marie, barefoot in the garden, tending to nasturtiums. So, it gives you a sense of how things shift and how things shifted from the poem itself to a theatricalization, a stage version of the poem. So I just want to touch on what I think is important in the process, moving from a piece which exists so beautifully on its own to a theatricalization of the piece. And what is, I think, more important than anything with adaptation, with a piece like Who Has Seen the Wind, which I'm adapting, started adapting this week, and I'm heavily into the research phase. You have 388 pages of a novel, which is an almost perfect creation. So Elysian, the deliberate act of omitting something, becomes enormously important to the piece. What do we keep? What subplots do we dispense with? What would W.O. Mitchell have considered the most potent, the most compelling, the most important thematically moments from his piece? So Elysian, omitting what do we leave out, becomes enormously important. With Gary's piece, with Falsework, pictures aside, you have about 88 pages of text. In that text, some voices are named. They come from a particular historical figure. And in other cases, the voices are unnamed. So number one, I had to think of, this piece had to be expanded in some way, expanded in terms of the physical theater telling of the story, but also expanded in terms of giving names and theatrical life to characters that were not named in the piece. So it became no less creative act than the one I have in front of me with Who Has Seen the Wind. But there were more gaps. There was more space to be filled. There was more physical storytelling to be done with this piece. So losing subplots did not become an issue. I began by combining and inventing characters and trying to find a clear dramatic beginning, middle, and end to the stories of the different characters in Falsework, the steelworkers themselves, the steelworkers who perished, the steelworkers who lived on and dealt with, their own, with alcoholism or trauma or survivor's guilt. And also very importantly, the community itself. How was the community affected? So I kept talking to the actors who were, bringing this to life about other models that I was thinking of. I'm thinking of Our Town, which is really an evocation of a community, not just the story of a single family or a single hero or heroine. And also looking at plays like Under Milkwood as models for what we were striving to do with this Vancouver story. So the act of adaptation there was very, very different than the one that is before me with Who Has Seen the Wind. So that becomes enormously important. The material itself. I talked to Gary shortly after we opened last week, and he was quite thrilled with what he saw in the stream version, sitting in his living room on Thetis Island. And one of the things he said to me, and what allowed me to kind of release and breathe again, because I was very nervous about how he would receive it, was he said the word spirit. He said the spirit of the story has been honored. The spirit of the poems has been honored. And I'd made a lot of additions. I'd invented new characters. I'd written about 30% of the text was material that I'd created for the theatrical version. And all of this sat really well with him because he felt that the spirit of the piece had been honored. So that I think for the adapting artist becomes the most important thing. Am I honoring the spirit of the piece? I know from talking with Orm Mitchell, who gave Brian Miskew and I the rights to create a musical out of Who Has Seen the Wind, that W.O. Mitchell, who died in 1998, was not happy with adaptations. He was not happy with the film adaptation, not happy with other treatments of other stories he had written, and had a really awful kind of introduction to that transformation, the kind of Hollywood treatment of his work. And so I listened very, very closely to what Orm had to say about the piece and the themes of the piece. And now I'm starting to think, well, I'm going back in my research and listening to a 45-minute adaptation that W.O. Mitchell wrote himself for the CBC. I'm listening to his reading on Audible, which is a 3-hour reading of the play. So it's an abridged version. And I'm looking very, very carefully at what W.O. chose to keep in. What did he decide to keep? What was most important thematically, and in terms of pure storytelling? What were the most important scenes in the novel to him? So I will start with those with that guidance, and then continue to do the research that I need to do to bring this piece to life. My co-creator in this piece, Brian Miskew, is a former student of mine. He's a very gifted composer. He will be from Winnipeg writing the music, and all of our meetings to this point have been on Zoom or over the phone. So it's all been kind of distance creation, which we're all getting used to. And he sent me a whole playlist of songs that he feels he'll be using as kind of touchstones, as inspiration for the music he wants to create for this piece. And both of us will try to come to some kind of agreement as to what that abridged, that condensed, compressed version of the story needs to be. And This is different than a play, of course, different than a total theater event such as Falsework was. This is a musical, and of a Canadian classic, and that has been, sold more than 1 million copies in this country alone. So there's a responsibility that comes with trying to lift it off the page and turn it into something it hasn't been before, into a musical. So that's both an exciting challenge, but daunting as well. So I wanted right now just to put up on the screen a grid that I have used for years, and I use it to when working with young playwrights, because one of the things I do is dramaturgy, and I'm a play doctor, and have worked with a number of former students and clients across the country. Joel Birnbaum, right, I'm very proud to say, is right now his verbatim piece about the immigrant experience in Canada is playing at the Belfry until I think Sunday night. And there have been a number of students that have come through the college who are now practitioners, who are now writing their own material, writing their own plays. And that, to me, that's a great, makes me very, very happy when that happens. So you can check that out. I think it can still be streamed if it, I think it ends on Sunday. But as we look, these are the kinds of considerations I look at as I'm moving through the first stage, the pre-writing phase of adaptation. I start with images. So what are the most potent images in Who Has Seen the Wind? What are the most potent images in Falsework, the ones that just leap out at me? One of the things that came to us very early in the process, because we rehearsed Falsework over about 4 months, was how do we show the collapse of a structure as indomitable, as large as the Second Narrows Bridge? And the way we decided to do that, I'm a huge fan of chair art. I'd seen a number of chair installations over the years that I loved. And we decided to, get all the chairs we could, every theater in Victoria, bring them into the studio and use chairs to build the bridge through the work events, and also use chairs in the stylized collapse of the bridge. And the chairs would be the only decor elements in terms of furniture, architectural pieces that could be moved on the stage. And that became was incredibly ambitious, because it required an enormous amount of our rehearsal time to choreograph the movement of the chairs. But it was an element that I now want to write into the production draft of Falsework, because it worked. It worked so beautifully. So that's an image, the image of chairs collapsing, chairs piling up in this open space. That with slides, visuals from the time, some of them historical, some of them from that would be there to support the storytelling, both abstract slides and historical slides. So those images from the time, images from the event itself, from the tragedy itself, played a large part in the helping to tell the story, helping to visualize and put the audience in the event. At one point, when the workers fall the 100 feet to the water, as when they struck the water, which they hit like, it was like striking concrete, they went under the water, and the slide, there was an animated slide of water that put the audience in that same drowning predicament as the players. So that was those elements were written into the story. Design elements became really an important part of the storytelling process. So I just want to share with you a few of those visuals right now. Just bear with me.
While that's coming up, Christopher, there was a question. I'm curious as well, would you be willing to share that grid by any chance so that it could be shared with people?
I will do that next.
As like a PDF, sorry.
Oh yeah, I'll share it with everybody that's present. Yeah, I'm happy to send it out if I have people's emails. That's happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Anybody who would like it, if you send me your email in the chat, I'll compile it and send it to Christopher after the chat. Thanks, Christopher.
Oh, you're welcome. So are people seeing any images up on the screen?
You can see
Yep.
it.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the inspirations for the use of the chairs for as the dominant decor element. Oops, that's from later. So I'm just going to put the grid back up for us. So images are enormously important. I began at this stage to make copious notes. I did for Falsework. I had a 70-page common book, which just had news articles, overheard voices from the time, radio broadcasts, my own clustering and imagery related to Gary's voices, what ifs, daydreaming aspects. All of this fills up. Anything's grist for the mill at this point. Then I start to craft biographies, both real and imaginary, for the characters from the piece. With Falsework, that was a significant job because there were 32 characters that the audience meets over the course of the 2 hours and 15 minutes. With Who Has Seen the Wind, the job will be to decide who are the most important in 2021, given our present predilections, our obsessions, given where we are as a country, politically, socially, that who survives, whose story we tell in a story that has a number of subplots becomes enormously important. So we have to trim the cast size considerably. So that's going to be a really one of the difficult jobs in the early going. It's just deciding which folk do we keep, what plots are most important. And again, I go back to using WSO as a guide. Go back to the elements of the story, the scenes from the story that he felt were most crucial, most compelling, most vital. Then we start looking at that art from the period. Now I'm going to put this up here. When I have a history with the book Who Has Seen the Wind that goes back 50 years. When I was in grade 7, the young adolescent, our teacher, Mr. W, read a version of the book that contained all these wonderful William Carlock illustrations. There are about 15 of them in the piece, some of them color, some of them kind of crosshatch kind of etchings, and they remain with me as a vivid part of that of receiving that story. Also, I was at a point where my father, when I was 12 years old, was dying in hospital. He survived, lived to well into his 90s, but at that time he was had diverticulitis and was his life was in jeopardy. So that theme, Brian O'Connell's the death, the sickness and subsequent death of his father loomed very large in the story for me. I'd also just transferred schools from a very sedate, well-behaved school, Burt Edwards on the North Shore, to a brand new school, Arthur Hatton, which was incredibly rough. And I was having an enormously hard time fitting in. So the character of the Ben, who's an outsider, a figure that lives on the margins of that tiny community, which is Weyburn, became a kind of touchstone for me in the story. It was one of the first instances of pure storytelling and really good storytelling from someone I didn't expect to receive it from. Mr. W, our teacher, who was in the throes of a nervous breakdown, trying to deal with this obstreperous, this tough group of students, and yet this was his best defense when he took out this book and read to us from the front of the class and became all of those characters. He was a very skillful actor. The whole room settled. There was a calm, and we wouldn't admit it, but we all looked forward to those story times. And he got into the habit of reading it to us right after lunch for an hour, all through the winter of '71. And that to me was life-changing. The book was enormously important to me, and to have the opportunity. And I didn't seek out the opportunity. It was Brian Miskew in Winnipeg who secured the chance for us. When this fell into my lap, I couldn't have been happier. So these, as we look at images, I will be looking really carefully at Kerouac's work, because Kerouac illustrated a number of W.O. Mitchell's books over the years. So that becomes an art touchstone that I will be looking at very, very carefully as I research this book. So I'll put the grid back up for us. So images, notes, bios, art, and music. I want to play something for you here. I'm just now beginning to go through Brian's playlist as the composer. He's sent me this whole raft of songs to listen to. But I want to play for you right now something that I used in the early days of creating Falsework, the play, and we also used it in rehearsal for the warm-ups and the character exploration work. Can everybody hear that?
No.
You can't hear that?
No.
No.
Well, I'll just describe some of the stuff. It's about a 20-minute mashup of material. It starts with Jimmy Dean's Steel Men, which was actually written after the fall of the bridge, became a small country hit. It celebrated the fallen steel workers. But that song, Steel Men, which is a kind of blues holler, in a way, a kind of country blues holler, reappears all the way through the play in different settings and as the mood of the piece shifts. So we used popular music. We used radio broadcast. I managed to secure I think it's a CKNW report on the day that the bridge collapsed. So the characters in the White Lunch, which was a very exclusive whites only restaurant on the downtown east side, which we also evoke. That is the song that they were hearing on the radio. So and there are other pieces that from more contemporary music that was used for the building of the bridge, for the collapse of the bridge. So these themes became a really important kind of background music for the creation of the piece, and also for the actors' work as they worked physically and began to discover their physical characters in rehearsal. So that was an enormously useful tool. So art and music figures largely in the nascent creation of an adaptation. I start to look at titles. I had a title which I really liked that Gary created for the piece, Falsework, Who Was Seen the Wind, that wonderful poem by Christina Rossetti that serves as the title for W.O. Mitchell's piece. That doesn't need to be changed. But one of the things I do to help focus the writing from scene to scene to scene is by naming each individual scene. And with Gary's work, some of the pieces were given the name of the actual poem that inspired the scene. And in other cases, we focused on an event or tried to focus through the title on the crisis or event of that particular scene. So titles, when you're in the early days, remember John Patrick Shanley talking about the creation of doubt. All he had in the early days of working on that Pulitzer Prize winner was the title, Doubt, the concept of doubt. So sometimes a title can be an enormous gift and can begin to help the writer shape the entire piece thematically and structurally. With Gary's piece, with Falsework, the whole issue of choices and change became enormously important, because a poem can, at least from a dramatic perspective, exist on the page as a kind of static entity, as something that doesn't really move in the way that a scene needs to move. I had to make adjustments and challenge the poem, try to pull out all of the possible examples of dramatic action. And in some cases, and what I was looking at from the beginning was looking at making sure that all of the characters in the piece, because everybody appears, has at least 2 scenes, some have 2 or 3, tracking their arc. How do they change over the course of the play, from the building of the bridge, that wild enthusiasm and the kind of rush of enterprise that seized all of them, through the collapse, the tragedy of the collapse, to the mourning period, which the entire second act is taken up with the community. It occupies itself with the community's mourning. So as a dramatist, I have to make sure, poet doesn't have to worry about this as much, I have to make sure that there is growth, there is change, and there are tactics for the actor playing that character to play. So choices and change become enormously important. I think W.O.'s piece is the challenge with it is because that piece is about a boy's musings, the mundane life on a prairie farm in the Depression 30s. Uh, so there's not a great deal of dramatic action. It's broken up into 4 different parts, and those 4 different chapters, the 4 different sections, are all connected to the death of some entity. First, we have the death of a rabbit. We have the death of a dog. We have the death of Brian's father, and we have the death of his grandmother, who he, at the beginning of the piece, seems to despise and grows to love dearly by her death. So death is a vivid character in this piece, and death accompanies all of the shifts in this Bildungsroman, this rite of passage that Brian goes through from age 4 to age 12. So although the film from 1977, Alan King's film, one of W.O.'s concerns, his chief concern, was for financial reasons, they decided to limit the action of the film to 2 seasons. W.O. insisted in his treatment, which they didn't look at, on the entire range of seasons, all 4 seasons, and all the stages of Brian's life, which might have necessitated using having a very young Brian and an adolescent Brian, but that's not the way that the filmmakers wanted to go. So he was enormously disappointed that not only did he feel the natural world, the meadowlarks, the wind itself, the prairie, was not represented, was not as potent a part of the story as it in the film as it is in the novel. So those elements are things that we're now going to want to bring into the score, bring into the soundscape, bring into the design of the musical, because it was enormously important to W.O. and W.O.'s estate. So that's something we'll be looking at very, very carefully. Conflict. All of the conflict that emerges in W.O. Mitchell is internal, is largely internal conflict. There are skirmishes between he and his schoolmates. There are minor skirmishes between kind of psychological scuffles with his parents and his grandmother. But by and large, it is a piece about the interior, the rich interior life of this farm boy. So that will be a challenge that is markedly different than the challenge of adapting Falsework, which was, a play for voices. Genre and style. Gary's piece is a memory piece, Falsework. It has elements of documentary, that it has elements of the elegy, poetic elegy. And so it was very important to me to honor the style of the piece. I'm still trying to grasp the W.O.'s style in the piece, which is he's a great teller of yarns. He has a remarkable capacity for capturing the young imagination, and a wonderful ability of creating very, very credible dialogue with amongst young people. So those are elements that we're going to want to honor, because it's a novel. Unlike some novels, there are a lot of descriptive passages, but there's an abundance of dialogue to be plumbed in the piece. So that'll be wonderfully rich to mine that material. Myth. I always go back to Joseph Campbell and look for the archetypes in the story and the fables that might be being retold in the piece. With Who Has Seen the Wind, we have a kind of a story which is about a coming of age, about childhood rites of passage. In many ways, I think it's a story about almost a Candide story, about an innocent, a genuine innocent, learning about the strange world he's being brought up in, that he's been born into. So looking for, what myth is being retold here, what fables being retold here, can be a really useful question for the adapter to ask herself, himself. My next job will be to create a sketch of the piece, a kind of treatment. I start with what I call a one-pager, which is trying to distill the story into a few paragraphs. And then from that sketch comes a treatment, which may be as long as 10 or 12 pages, where I'm expanding it. That's where I start to I find recipe cards enormously useful, particularly when you're dealing with a bigger story that might contain numerous subplots. You can buy these for about $1 at the dollar store, and they're color coded. So these as a way of beginning to craft a storyboard, file cards can be enormously useful. So every file card represents a one scene in the piece. I think David Lynch said at one point that if you can fill 70 recipe cards with 70 scenes, you've probably got enough material for a feature. I've heard other figures quoted, but between 50 and 70, and you've got a story that might fill might be feature length. So this is a wonderful storyboarding technique that I start shortly after I've fleshed out a 10 to 12 page treatment, which is what I'm involved in right now. And then once that's created, I start to look at the cast design. Who are the most useful people to keep in this piece? Where does the heat, where does the tension, where are the moments of the high stakes moments of interaction? Where are the arguments and battles? John Guare once said that any play worth its salt starts with a good argument, the operative word being good. Right? So I start to go through, I'll be looking through the book for arguments, conflagrations that happen between characters, and then consider, do I need to keep this part of the story? Do I have to need to keep this plot and not the other? So cast design, how the characters play off one to the other, how they what function do they fulfill in the piece from a storytelling perspective? That becomes enormously important. I just want to stop for a second for any questions that might have come up for people thus far. Are there any questions?
Yes, it's Steve here. I'm just trying to work out how to get my image back, but I can't.
I can hear you clearly, Stephen.
Okay, I'll work out how to get the image back. Just going right back to the beginning of your talk, when you were talking about rehearsing, interested to know a little bit more about how you managed rehearsing with masks and COVID. Were your rehearsals all in person, or did you attempt to do any rehearsing by Zoom? And when it came to the masks, you say people were wearing masks in performance as well.
They were. It's it's interesting. I'll start with that part of your question first and work backwards. That I think Gary saw it twice, and some of his colleagues and friends watched it on closing after having seen it on opening. And one of the problems he had with it was what I would call the problem of the masks. And that in a play that has 30 plus characters, it's an enormous challenge for the actor to create distinctly different character bodies and mannerisms for characters that are masked. When you don't have access to the face and the mouth, even though the character they were clearly heard and their diction was excellent, it does can create confusion. So the masks made it harder for the spectators to connect, both the spectators watching the streamed version and the people in the audience, the cohorts in the audience. It was harder for them to differentiate one character from the next. So that's a challenge that hopefully we won't have to face in a maskless production of the piece. We did have to have a few Zoom rehearsals, not full Zoom rehearsals, but because of the nature of the agreement that, you know, if a person was feeling even a slight tickle in the throat, they were advised to stay home. So on occasion, we'd have people on camera that were watching and kind of feeding in or reading in their lines. But the majority of the rehearsals were, we were in situ together in different studios of varying sizes. So masked always, and always respectful of that 6 foot distance. So the only time we challenged, we pushed the limit with proximity and came closer than 6 feet was during the bar fight and in the moments of violence, which could only be executed safely if the characters were in contact. But fortunately, we had people from the same cohort, some roommates that were involved in the fights that could get that close. But for the rest of the play, we kept people at a safe distance, and we always rehearsed together. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
Yes, it does, but I'm sure other people have got other questions. But with the masking during performance, I mean, you know, there's, you know, the Commedia dell'arte where masks are used, although usually the face, the mouth is exposed. Mm-hmm. Did you consider somehow customizing the masks?
We had a very, very gifted costume assistant, Haley Sabarin, who's actually from Cologne. Maybe one or two of you that know her. And she came up with these kind of tribal colors for all of the different characters. Like the steel workers had their own colored masks. The family members had their own colored masks. People that worked in the community had different colors. And we had kind of the company masks and the steel worker masks. So that coding, not unlike what you might do with, you know, sashes or flags in a Shakespearean production, that really helped the spectators differentiate one community group from another. So that helped a lot, and that was Haley's innovation.
Thanks a lot. It's great. Thank you.
Oh, great. Anyone else?
Stephen, I have a question. Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, do you think it's possible to adapt a work that there are components of it that you don't necessarily agree with? For instance, like my favorite novel, I've always loved it and I've always kind of dreamed of adapting it, but it's a Christian novel. And while that's like lovely for other people, it doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I find the story very inspiring. So I'm like, is it possible to reconcile that kind of difference in opinion or what have you when you're adapting something?
That's a really good question, Elise. I wrestled with that issue in a much smaller way, working on Falsework. I'm working with the word, Gary is 82, a different generation than myself. The world that he was writing about was a very, very masculine world. And there was, I won't say shades, but there overtones of not misogyny, but about the writing for the men was better than the writing for the women, in my view. So that was something that I took upon as a challenge. And also the fact that when I did the math, in 1958, queer people existed. Did you know that? Yeah. So in our version of it, we said, okay, there has to be at least 2 or 3 people that are either in the closet or are, loud and proud, which was very unusual, very rare at that time. So we decided that Delia, the consultant, was going to have a big crush on the cabaret singer, and they would leave together. And also there's an unspoken attraction relationship between 2 of the steel workers that's touched on. So those adjustments, and also the bigger adjustment, I would say at least, would be the structure of the second act, which really became about communal grief. So I think if the energy of the first act was hyper masculine, the energy of the second act was more feminine, in that it was about coming to terms with loss. And some of the men did it expertly, and others, turned to the bottle. So you saw the fracturing that was happening amongst the surviving steel workers, and the family, the widows dealing with it in a much different way. And that was really important to me, that it wasn't really a significant facet of the poem's suite. It's something that I wanted to bring to the piece. So my long answer to your question is that I would not rule out, I don't think you have to be philosophically aligned or spiritually aligned with the piece to do a good job adapting it. The first piece I was given to adapt was Tehanu by Ursula K. Le Guin. I was no great fan of fantasy fiction, nor was I a great fan of Ursula K. Le Guin's. I had to learn to fall in love with her because I was hired. I was a hired gun. So that would be another instant where I say, okay, geez, this book's opaque to me, So after 30 readings, I liked it a bit more, right? So I had to do that work to fall in love with Ursula K. Le Guin. So that would be my answer. I think don't rule out, if there's something that inspires you, don't rule out the possibility of adapting it simply because it's philosophically at odds with your beliefs.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Good. That's great. Great question. So I just want to continue going. It doesn't matter that we touch on all of them, but I just wanted to touch on a few more points of the grid. This is up now, or should be, as I share it. Oh, that's the former one again. I'll bring the other one up. So point of view becomes really important, that what are your hero's passions? Brian O'Connell has this passion to know what life's about, to know what death is, who God is, why the wind, why the wind, he can feel the wind but not see the wind. So all of those mysteries, unanswerables perhaps, and which remains elliptical and unanswered in the novel, are the questions that obsess him. So his point of view is very, very different than the points of view of the Dominion Bridge employee or the steel worker. And it's a jeune, it's an innocent refreshingly fresh vision of the world. So I want to honor that and really dive into Brian's very, very distinctive point of view. Setting, Vancouver, one of the compliments I received last week from the premiere of the workshop production was that one of my colleagues said that she felt that the piece was a love letter to Vancouver, or to Vancouver history. So I felt that the setting, Vancouver as a milieu, as an atmosphere, as a where, was well rendered in the piece. Were she able to say? And I want to go even further with that, with the subsequent production drafts that will come. Knowing your hero or heroine, choosing a really good hero, a hero that is not passive, a hero that that changes, that morphs over the course of the story, is enormously important. And W.O. Mitchell has done a fine job with Brian in that way. He goes through so many changes over the course of the 4 chapters of the piece. So it'll be my fault if that journey is not well represented and fully fleshed out. Scenes and sequences, the scene arrangement with Gary's piece, we in the first act there were a couple of flashback scenes. We start that play with the lone surviving steelworker, Lou Lessard, who is still alive, in his garden at the end of the COVID memorial. So we start in the present and move backwards because it's a memory play. So the sequence order, the mise en scene, how the scenes were cut together, became enormously important. There is a much more formal structure that I will need to follow with Who Has Seen the Wind. It's structured like a 4-act play. So I want to honor that first before I change any of that. I think that the structure is very, very sound. With the material, the medium that I was working with Falsework allowed me to be a little freer with the ordering of the scenes and the sequence of scenes. As in my view, a poem is already a subtextual event. That it's a kind of the dialogue of one's inner voices that's happening. Sometimes it reaches out to others, or people are, the speaker will try to contact someone who can't hear them. But subtext is what poetry is all about. So that was already in place. With Falsework, I had to actually work in inverse fashion, in that saying what physicality, what stage movement best suits the subtext of the poem, best evokes the subtext of the poem. So that the physical theater elements of the play became enormously important for kind of embodying the subtext of the different poems. The quest in Who Has Seen the Wind is an individual childish quest for knowledge. The quest in Falsework is very, very different. It's really about a community. It's about a community striving, coming to maturity, about Vancouver kind of growing into itself as it did in the late 50s with all the building boom that was happening, and amazing structures being erected. The BC Hydro building, which was this architectural marvel in the international style, that was something brand new to Vancouver. The bridge itself was one of the biggest bridges being built. The Second Eras was one of the biggest bridges being built in Canada at that time. So that the thrill of that quest, ironworkers being the creme de la creme of bridge builders being the creme de la creme of all ironworkers. They were on this mission, this quest to create something extraordinary. So it was very easy to be caught up in the spirit, the enthusiasm of that quest. But it was really the quest of an entire community. The themes are things I wrestle with in different ways. Again, as I've said, I build a common book with images, disparate images. The W.O. Mitchell will be filled with images of the prairie, Caroluk. I'll be doing a deep dive into Saskatchewan art and history. So that will be, a thrilling part of the journey as well. Mystery, both pieces are rich with mystery. I think Who Has Seen the Wind, the title itself is a question, is a kind of koan. It's an unanswerable question that is posed. And so I want to honor, I don't want to explain the story or to the spectators that are coming to see the musical. I want to honor the mystery that's in W.O.'s text, in the story itself. The unanswered questions are more important than what happens or the answers to any of those insoluble questions. Once I've created a longer treatment, 10, 12 pages, I start to look at the story from back to front. There's a wonderful book by David Ball called Backwards and Forwards, which describes that dramaturgical process where you think experiencing a novel or a play from the end to the start is incredibly instructive for a writer or a director or an actor for that matter. So I'll be looking very, very, very closely at the shape of the piece, looking for what I identify as the crisis, the climax. How is, if in fact there is a denouement, is it, or an epilogue, is it necessary? Where do I know that W.O. was profoundly dissatisfied with where the film ended, and the ending of this novel, this soon to be a play, is enormously important. So I'll be looking very, very closely at W.O.'s the structure for answers to those questions. And then after we have 3 years to work on this piece, I'm aiming at May 17th for to have a treatment to discuss with the composer. So all this pre-writing, all this common book work will end up contributing to that process and the creation of a prose treatment of the piece before I've started to flesh out the scenes or decided with Brian where the songs live or what those lyrics might be. We look at the overall structure first. So I'd like to open things up for questions. And just before I do that, I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I just wanted to play for you, if I can, the trailer from Falsework, which was released about 2 weeks ago. I'll just see if this works. Just trying to find it, sorry. Just let me know if you can see this.
I still see the adaptation. It's like a green.
Do you?
Green sheet with text. Oh, there we go.
just gives you a taste of what how it was realized, the physical theater elements. So are there questions?
Well, I have a question. I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Just from that video, actually, I find it really interesting that you tend to work with a lot of different movement and object. And I'm wondering if that's something that you try to use in sort of inform the reader or director or actor about while you're writing, or how much you like to give in terms of interpretation, like how prescriptive are you in with your writing and stage directions?
That's a really good question. A lot of the stage directions that were written at first reading, which was draft 3.5 or 4, I was very fortunate in that it was a working rehearsal. It was a workshop production. So a lot of the discoveries we made, I didn't know we were going to use chairs until 3 weeks in. And so I was working with a physical theater team that and working quite collegially is my bent. And so all of these notions would come to the fore through the rehearsal process, which was ridiculously short, like much shorter than it should have been for the kind of work we were doing. But what I did benefit from was a genuine workshop production where the students were contributing and finding things in our exercises and etudes that we could use in the staging. And then I'll be writing down a lot of those details that aren't in draft 4. So that was one of the unexpected benefits of working with this really diligent group of young actors, is that they really help to shape it in a physical theater way.
Thank you.
So all of those things, those will be incorporated into the next draft that I'm sharing with Gary in a couple of months. Anyone else?
I've had a question.
Yes.
Do you have, if you could pick maybe one pitfall to warn us against when adapting from a novel?
Well, I go back to the Bonfire of the Vanities, which is, I think, one of the worst adaptations in all of cinema. In that, what they did there was they narrated it to death. Like, if you're going to have a narrator, make sure that narrator is not stepping on the scenes, not interfering with the flow of the comedy or the drama. So, and I think also experiments in trying to film the book, saying, oh, just film the book. Just, put the book into the screenplay. That it's better, easier said than done. And that is always a mistake. That you have to have some strong ideas about how it needs to shift. I think of Field of Dreams. If you've read Shoeless Joe, and then you read the adaptation of it, they're radically different. And yet the writer of the book was wildly sad. He was over the moon because he said, you made it into a film. And it's not the same event. So there will always be purists, sticklers. We had a couple the other night who, went, stumbling towards Gary's version of Falsework and saying, where the hell is it? Where's this? This scene's not in the thing. I said, no, it isn't. I invented the character for the piece, right? And so Gary gets that as the artist, but some of his friends who had, this an allegiance to the original piece didn't quite see it that way. So you have to have the moxie, the bravery to make changes. It will have to change to become a film, to become a play. It has to change. And most most artists that I've dealt with, from Ursula K. Le Guin to Gary, are only interested in how it works as a play. They're far less, they're not easily bruised when they see changes. That's been my experience with good writers.
Super, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that helps. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yes, Chantal.
I'm taking your workshop coming up in April about
Oh, great.
the solo creative. So
Great.
obviously that's a different animal. So what's the major distinction and difference between adapting an already existing work and creating from scratch, so to speak?
Well, I think there's a lot that's similar and a lot that's different. What you'll be creating in that workshop is a short form event. So like a short story or a poem, it has its own, a 10-minute play has its own rules. And those rules can be broken, but there's a reason most successful 10-minute plays unfold the way they do. So that, and the fact that you're working, I don't know, you might be adapting something, you might be working from, might be creating a story from your, that is unique to you. You might be working from life experience. I don't know. We spend a lot of our time just trying to figure out what kind of play do you want to write. So there'll be etudes, exercises where you're just exploring, right? Because I think if we can go in with all kinds of fixed notions, and sometimes those fixed notions will be useful. At other times, the most consistent stumbling block for young writers and new writers is that they try to fit 5 or 6 plays into one. They're writing 5 or 6 plays, they're not writing a single play. So part of the process is if you haven't written or you've wanted to write for a long time, that may happen. You try to channel everything into this one event. So questions about whose story is it? What is stage worthy about this story? How does it hold together as how does it move structurally? What will help it to gain momentum? All of those questions become important when, creating a short form piece. You've got no time. In a 10-minute play, there's virtually no room for exposition. So you're just, to use Raymond Carver's terms, you're kind of getting in late and getting out early. Like that becomes enormously important. And small casts usually work better than big casts in short form pieces.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yep.
Thanks, Chantal. Anyone else?
You were so thorough and clear that everyone's got. I've gotten a lot out of this. Incredibly helpful and useful. I think it sounds like myself, many people in this room are. Some people are fairly experienced writers, and I think many of us are actors and directors and writing for the first time or just very early on in our writing careers. So I personally found this incredibly beneficial as not just a emerging writer, almost writer, but I think also I think the other actors and directors in the room would agree that this is helpful as from those perspectives as well. I'm sure because you seem to approach your work sort of from every angle. Would you say? Really understanding what the actor and director need, as opposed to.
Well, I think I was a bit of a Grotowski, not in that poor theater is what I love. Like how simply and beautifully can you tell the story, and also storytelling that puts the onus on the actors to do the bulk of the work. theater as an actor-centered place, not a place of auteurs or lighting designers or sound designers. That I think that's really, really important. That we give the power for the storytelling back to the actors, which is one of the things that I was trying to do with that wonderful group in Victoria, and they rose to it. That we're moving into a new age, hopefully an age that is slightly more democratic, slightly more open to a collegial approach and sharing power. And that was one of the takeaways for this work on Falsework, because I got so many great ideas from the team, from the company, that are now incorporated in the piece. So it really felt symbiotic, the whole process. Lots of give and take.
Are we still doing questions, or are we done with
It's entirely up to Alana, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yes,
I'll allow it. Yes.
Well, thank you. Christopher, I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about adapting something versus creating something yourself, writing something yourself, because like in my own experience, I feel, as I said, kind of very inspired by the idea of adapting something else and bringing to the stage. But when it comes to creating my own piece or work like that, I got nothing. I freeze up, I got nothing. So I'm just kind of interested in the different processes and like what you think is necessary to kind of do either or what have you. Or
yeah, I think there are a few like experts or kind of Christopher Hampton is one person I would cite as an example of a really fine writer who never writes his own material. There's another guy named Shakespeare who same deal. He wrote 2 or 3 original plays. The rest were improvements on other people's work, right? Which was, that was de rigueur at that time. Everybody did that. But now we get so precious about bringing our own ideas to fruition. We ignore all of these possibilities in the world of poetry, short stories, or opera. Rent. La Boheme becomes Rent. Romeo and Juliet becomes West Side Story. That it's going to be a different event. And sometimes if you can start with an adaptation and veer off and create something wholly original, having started with that. So I would say if there's a story that inspires you, try to adapt it and see where it goes, because it might become something utterly your own, utterly new. But I think works in the public domain, where copyright is not something you have to worry about, that can be tremendously useful. I started in the world of adaptation with Shakespeare. I was hired by Bard of the Beach to create a reading series, and that meant adapting plays from the period or turning Henry VI into a 2.5-hour event. So I cut my teeth working on new versions of Shakespeare. So I think it's just what's most important is you gravitate towards stuff that you're passionate about. Don't write an adaptation of something you're indifferent about, or if you are indifferent about it, try to find a way to fall in love with it, as I had to with fantasy fiction in the world of Le Guin.
absolutely, I think there's such a prevalence that I feel personally in our society that if you're not creating your own stuff, then you're not an artist. But I think that's such a much healthier and vibrant way of interpreting, taking someone else's inspiration and making it into this new beautiful thing that people can access is way so much more inspiring.
It's easy to understand why those attitudes exist, because when I reached out to the BC Arts Council and other groups and saying, hey, we just got the rights to Who Has Seen the Wind. Do you think there's, we could get some seed money? The door slammed shut brusquely, because, you're not creating something from scratch. In other words, there's this kind of a little bit of asceticism when it comes to adaptations. They're considered, kind of subpar or something. But there are some of there's I can point to scores of examples of wonderful films, brilliant plays that came from another source, that were adaptations. So I think that's a kind of a arch attitude that needs to die.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, there's Adam and Zoe. Hello. In the corner there. Any other questions?
Well, I'll ask
I
one.
do have one.
Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Adam's got a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to word it. It's so I'm going to be probably creating a solo show in the next year or so.
Good for you.
And sorry?
Good for you. That's great.
Thank you. I'm at Studio 58, so they make us do that. So I'm excited for it.
They force you to do that. You don't get out until you
yeah. And so part of my struggle with creating a solo show is I know I'm talking to the audience. The character is talking to the audience, or figuring out how I'm making it so that they're talking to somebody or they're talking to the audience, but having it also creating action, but not have it be exposition all the time. I wrote a script last semester I was in, and I really, really found it challenging to put more words on the page because I didn't have a lot of action going on because it's one person grappling with something, an internal struggle. So I wanted to figure out how to make that internal struggle bigger and more out there for something to watch from an audience, and to have more words to write on the page without being exposition.
That's a really significant problem for anyone working on a solo piece. My advice to you would be to study the solo form, which goes all the way back to curtain raisers in Moliere's time, but more recently Chekhov wrote a whole raft of curtain raisers, which are solo pieces. Right? Look at Spalding Gray's work. Look at Daniel McIver's. I think I prefer his work for solo actors over his ensemble pieces. So I would study that form and say, well, how is the story told? Who is that unfortunate fellow in House talking to? How does he tell the story? So point of view is one thing, but you're never ever alone, right? Not in a soliloquy by Hamlet, not in your own solo piece. So I'll use Vonnegut's term: pity the spectator, pity the audience, right? Keep them in your sights from the beginning of the piece to the end of the piece. It's a conversation. So that is, I think, the niftiest way to kind of step around the problem of kind of solipsism or kind of wankiness in solo pieces. It's that keeping the audience in mind, and what do you want them to feel? What kind of experience do you want them to have? I think they have to be considered almost from day one. You're not writing a novel. You don't have to worry about that. Well, you have to pity the reader, perhaps, but that's a slightly different game. So I would just look at some of those examples that I've given you. There's a wonderful writer Debbie Tucker Green, a British writer actor who writes in this really wild hip hop style, and she writes for one voice. Two of her last places are for one actor. And you also start to look at how writers change guises, because in some solo pieces we're meeting, like Lily Tomlin, The Search for Intelligent Life, we're meeting 20 people, right? We're meeting a whole cast of characters evoked by one actor. So the sky's the limit. It all depends on what kind of story you want to tell.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that helpful?
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's helpful for sure. Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else?
We are almost at time.
Cool.
So maybe one final question or words of advice for us all, perhaps. I know you often mention compassion when you're working with us actors. While we're writing, do you have any tips on exercising some self-compassion as we're going through the process, which can sometimes be very difficult?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, Ilana. I think my advice for the writer is very similar to my advice for the actor in the early rehearsal, that everything you're offering is perfect. Now, what do you want to change? Everything is perfect. So John Lazarus once said to me that he never throws away a single page. It doesn't matter what dreck he's written that day. He holds on to it until he knows beyond a shadow of a doubt it's not going to be useful in the piece. Because while we're writing it, we're not very good judges, and self-loathing being what it is, and the actor writer, the theater creature being, who she is, who he is, we deal with anxiety, self-loathing all the time. So affording yourself the same compassion that you give others in a rehearsal setting, that would be my advice. That this piece that was written that is less than perfect is the work of your favorite writer. That favorite writer is you, right? So you have to, that's the mindset that's needed for that, or else you will be tearing up a lot of paper and staring at a lot of blank pages, and that's agony, right? Natalie Goldberg read most of her books. She's a wonderful writing coach, and she talks about keeping the fingers moving across the page. I mean, if you're working with a laptop, keep the fingers tapping. If you're working cursively, keep your hand moving across the page. Keep just free writing. Streaming is enormously useful in the early going. Giving yourself permission just to write anything can be a great start. So quantity over quality. And I think that's because the only thing that distinguishes a writer from a non-writer is writing, is the actual act of putting pen to paper, fingers to keyboard. And that, now that I have this abundance of spare time, I'm finding that the blocks I dealt with as a younger man are less insurmountable than they were. So I think it's a great antidote for the anxiety that we're all feeling right now, is channeling that energy into work, into something beautiful that you've created with your own hand.
Well, I think that is a perfect note to end the evening on. I would like to thank you, Christopher, for spending your time with us and sharing all of your knowledge. And I want to thank everybody who is here. Some people did have to leave early, but the recording will be available for them. So if anyone wants to revisit this recording, again, it'll be on the RCA's YouTube page at some point. But this was just great to be in this space with you. And I know we're all really missing the rehearsal space and being together. So this is the next best thing. So
it is the next best thing. Yeah. And thank you so much for the opportunity, Ilana, and all of you. It was great to meet this way.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was so inspiring.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, I hope so.
Wonderful.
I hope so.
Oh,
I hope
yeah.
Mesmerizing. It was great. Yeah.
Thanks, Christopher. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad, and thank you so much for your wonderful questions, and I look forward to meeting you all in the flesh sometime in the near future.
Definitely.
Take care.